So welcome to our second lightning sessions of talks for the Drupal Decoupled Menu Initiative. We will be recording this, and you're probably then looking at this now on YouTube if you are. So we put it up there after this talk, but now we are live here, and we will hear about two topics today. First, from Miro, talking about JSON API and work he's been doing with the JSON API. And then Joao is going to be telling about his work with GraphQL. So each one of you have 30 minutes. We try to have 20 minutes of you showing us something and demoing, and then the last 10 minutes to try to have like a little bit of Q&A. And we, of course, want to hear from you also listening here. So please just start, Miro. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all of you for coming. Let me share my screen and let's get started. So today I'm going to talk about customizing JSON API output. I used all of these techniques for check COVID info web. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about architecture. My name is Miro Michalicka. I'm Drupal and DevOps engineer at Jobiqo, and I also enjoy occasional Drupal work for our community. This project was completely built as community project. So there were three organizations. One was Czech Drupal Association. Then the other one was organization called Česko Digital, and they are trying to promote, make e-government in Czechia better. And the third one was one of the Czech government agencies. With this, we were taking care about the Drupal part, and there was another team taking care about the Gatsby.js part, because we picked Gatsby.js as our front-end framework. So first, about the architecture, as I already said, we were using Drupal 9 and Gatsby.js, and we had to take several things into considerations. First of them were translations, where if you know how paragraphs and Drupal translations are working, then we were a bit concerned that it might be too hard for some of our editors to use paragraphs and translate the content. So therefore, we also use some custom fields. And the other thing was also related to translations, basically, and how well this will work with workflow. The translation itself of the paragraphs was pretty okay, and it was working with Gatsby.js integration out of the box. But with workflow, there are some small issues, but nothing major. This is entity relations diagram. So a lot of Czech words probably don't understand, but everything is related to some situations you might experience during the COVID situation, and then these situations are categorized somehow, and they are affected by some government laws and stuff. In the end, the Czech government completely changed how they are publishing these COVID restrictions, so it was fun to do changes in the end. And how we were connecting Gatsby.js to Drupal, Gatsby.js already provides quite nice integration for Drupal. It's NPM plugin, and you just need to download it into your Gatsby.js project. So we didn't do anything special. We just provided basic JSON API, but then front-end developers weren't quite happy about that, because you know how JSON API output looks like, and it was returning too much data, and it was hard to understand which data you should actually use So we started modifying these default outputs, and I'm going to talk about 4 techniques we used. The first of them is JSON API extras Contrib module, and this Contrib module basically enables you to modify this default output of body field, where I use the example of body field, where you have value format, then something called process, then even summary if it is basic body field, to something quite easily understandable by front-end developer, which is just body and some HTML output. And this image in the middle is the configuration of JSON API extra, so you can pick some enhancers. I use single nested property and then specify which property of these body properties I used. There are also 4 others. I think that 3 of them are related to dates. So, but you can, of course, program your own enhancer. These enhancers are working on quite low level, so it's not so easy to modify more advanced things. For example, we wanted to modify the URLs of redirects, and it wasn't possible with this JSON API extras enhancer because it has access to only values of the field. So it's working on the type data level, same as normalizer. And that was the second technique we used for some even simpler stuff, which, as you can see on this example, we were just trying to remove some extra HTML attributes because we can. So we were trying to make the HTML output beautiful. And with these normalizers, you only have access to the type data itself, and you can get to the parent, but then it's quite hard to work with that. So I wouldn't recommend it for anything too more complex. Here you can see that we were trying to copy the URL in case that we were just trying to copy the URL in case that you have link field and the title of that link field is empty. So that's still quite simple. It's still wrapped as the same field, so we were able to access these properties using parent. So that was quite easy. Then, as I was talking, there were some changes at the end of the project, and we ended up with several versions, and these versions were just switching based on the numbers of positive people in the country. So we didn't want editors to have to copy and paste the same text over and over again, so we added them paragraphs. But if we would output all these paragraphs to the front end, then they would need to take care about that and figure out which version of the restrictions is valid. But we were able to do it quite easily in front end. So the third technique we use is computed field, and it's not really like decoupling technique, it's more general Drupal thing. So first of all, you need to implement hook entity base field info hook, and you just set which class should be taking care about that field. And this is the function, well, the class which we implemented, and it just gets the active version and then says the correct value to the field we want to output. And we just return this single field instead of returning 10 paragraphs. The fourth and the last technique we used is custom API resource, and it's probably when you want to do some really heavy lifting. This is not possible to do just with core. You need to have JSON API custom resource module, which was created by Gabe. And we use this custom resource for redirects because we wanted to enable editors to change URLs quite easily. And we also wanted to take some work of the front-end people. So all they were expecting was one URL where you are redirecting from and another URL you are redirecting to. So redirect is entity within Drupal, but if you look into its content, then it just contains entity ID, and then it contains URL, but without any language. And since the site was in 5 languages, then we needed to provide some the URLs with language. So therefore, we decided to create this redirects custom API resource. And you just need to provide this process function, and it returns JSON API resource. Then you need to register it. So you just create normal entry in your module.routing.yaml file and make sure that as default you use the correct resource and the correct resource type. And then there was issue that even though we successfully created this resource, it was not showing in this root resource list. So if you go to /JSON API, then this resource was not there. And you need another Contrib module, which is called JSON API Hypermedia, to actually add your link to this list. So all you need to do is download this JSON API Hypermedia module and implement one class. The annotation is important. And yeah, you need to specify this link relation type, which was something we weren't really sure about. And yeah, that's basically it. And then of course you need to add some extra YAML file which will describe this this link relation type. And yeah, that's all from my presentation. Hopefully it was helpful for you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Miro. I think, yes, let's ask questions. Who has one? Does anyone have one?
Yeah, I got one. So you used a lot of different methods to modify your JSON API. Is there anything that you think that should just exist with JSON API, or do you think all of these things are very custom and they should be done that way, the way that you did it?
I think all those things were quite specific for our use case, but I would definitely welcome that if you are able to define custom resource, then I would expect that it automatically shows on this root listing, and it would be probably beneficial if you can define custom API resource directly with core, not with extra Contrib module.
Anyone else interested, or we have also like just generally 10 minutes to chat a little bit about JSON API and what we expect there, or I would actually like to welcome that as being a little bit of discussion. Maybe Gabe, not putting you on the spot here, but maybe you could also tell us a little bit about the work that you are working on now for the menu response, or if anybody here wants to like put in some ideas, what could be helpful.
I don't have ideas to add other than to echo your experience has been quite similar to mine, in that digging through lots of the data has been not difficult, but a bit of a chore, I guess. And yeah, we definitely ended up writing like middleware and stuff to abstract that and make sure we had stable APIs, for example. Like, changing the content model means you change your API and things like that. So that's also something I've used JSON API extras and other things for.
Anyone? Yeah. So anyone else? I saw that Gabe went in and out. Probably some connections problems on his side. If there are no more discussions about the JSON API, or if there is nothing, we could just give Joao a little bit more time to talk about the GraphQL implementation. Okay. So maybe Gabe, I see you. Yeah.
I missed it. Did somebody ask a question?
No, I asked you just generally if there's anything that you are working on now, or where those who are interested in the JSON API, if there's something that we can help with in terms of like improving, or just that was just more of a plug for that you can promote here if you.
What I would love to see is people just to report issues about like JSON API hypermedia and JSON API resources, and talk about the problems that you're having, because it's a little eye-opening for me to like look at the hypermedia thing and say, oh, the link relation types didn't make that much sense. So we should definitely either document that better or figure out a different way to do that. It's always fun to watch people using code you wrote and then cringe to yourself. But good job, Miro. I really like what you guys are doing.
Thanks.
Awesome. So yeah, what I can only echo what Gabe is, I think, saying. Like if he or we all here don't hear what are the issues, so please use the issue queue, or of course just here in Slack directly, point it out. I know that some of you have been doing that as well. So we would then just change the topic around and now go over to the same company. Joao, you can take over yes. Now, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Let me share my screen. Yes. So yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. So I think my idea for this is to share more or less how we are using the GraphQL module over at Jobiqo. So a while ago we decided to go with the GraphQL module, and since we've built quite a lot of things, I think, and some of them might be interesting for people to hear. So just a little bit about me. My name is Joao Garin. I'm a front-end developer at Jobiqo. I'm from Lisbon, father of two, and you can find my my handle is always the same. Also on Drupal.org, which I failed to put here. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, and I think I'm not sure I'm going to have time to cover all of this, but I will try to at least cover the most important parts. Because I do think there's quite a lot of nuggets in what we are doing at Jobiqo. Maybe we are doing too much, or decouple is just really, really hard. So I will start with menus and then authentication. Search API is a crucial part of our system. Also forms and file uploads, and then also just, if we have time, go a little bit into how the schema works in the GraphQL module. So our setup, we are kind of in a progression from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, so kind of skipping Drupal 8 a little bit, and the stack is very complicated. It became complicated over time, and this is not to get like too caught up in this picture particularly, but we have data coming in through XML feeds, through ATSs. We have data going out to CRMs. We have the front end, of course. We have mobile apps sometimes, if that's the case. And so the idea was to have more or less a centralized place, and that's Drupal, and then really have an API-centric system, which the center would be Drupal 8, using GraphQL to ship data and to also let data come in. Yeah, so the first thing I think I will cover is menus, of course, because the initiative is, at least for now, tackling menus. I think a good way for this, I'm going to just go over to a new window here and show, like, I have here a completely standard Drupal 8 site with GraphQL enabled, and this is just I just enabled the module, and I enabled a module which is inside the GraphQL, which is called GraphQL Composable Example. So when you enable the GraphQL module, if you go over to configuration, and this is just because I will try to explain how you would create the menus and then consume the menus in GraphQL. So you select this schema, which is the one that goes by default. It ships with the module, just so you can start trying the module. I will make the endpoint called GraphQL. I will also enable debugging. And if I go to the Explorer, oops, of course, did I do something? Well, I will show this in another place then. This is the same thing. Basically, you have a query here, and you have basically a lot of things. In the example module, we would have a lot less because it's just what the example module provides, which is articles. Let me try one thing here, because I think, yeah. Yes, I might have to clear this cache. Let me just try, because I wanted to show the simple example first, but of course. Let's see if this, no. Okay, let's go over to this one. So basically in the query, by default in GraphQL, things are not, they don't work automatically. You have to create your schema and then add resolvers, which is basically how you retrieve the data from Drupal. Just coming here, there's in the documentation, there's here how you create this. So the schema file is really, you can create whatever you want. You define the names and you define how the naming and the models are structured. And so there's a menu. Inside the menu, there's a name, and then there's items inside of the menu, and items can have other items inside of them, and so on. So here I'm consuming a menu. You can see I get, for example, this user account menu. I get a logout link. But if I try the same query and I'm logged out, then I get the login, because this menu item is provided by Drupal, and it reads if the current user is authenticated or not. And this is how you would do the menus in GraphQL. You do have to create resolvers for these particular things. So this part is explained more or less here. And this is through a concept called data producers, which allow you to basically say, okay, from the menu, I want to get the menu, and this is a data producer called entity load, which allows it to load any entity, and then you have the menu name, and that's a property, and so on. And then you can resolve all of these fields. That's more or less the idea with menus. Let me just see if I, yeah. No, I think that's more or less it. So regarding some topics from the initiative that I saw from the demo, I think Yeah, so the idea with menus is, so internally at Jobiqo, we do ship menus. We don't have a super complex menu. We have, so when you're logged in, we have several menus and we control over them, all of them through Drupal, but they're not super complex in terms of hierarchy and everything. So in GraphQL, it's really mostly the front end that controls what he wants from the data and from the API. And so in terms of the hierarchy, for example, if I want 3 levels, I will specify in my query those 3 levels. And if I want 4, then I specify 4. If I only want 2, and that's more or less the idea. Just so some of the things work really out of the box with these data producers that GraphQL provides. So the entity load, get menu tree, get menu link. These are things that the GraphQL module provides that you can use to consume menus. And for example, the no link and how you approach that is you can create your own property if that's something you need. It just won't have like an href, for example. It won't have a path. I was just showing here more or less a component that queries for a menu. This is how normally you would see a component that loads from GraphQL. It uses, so there's a query here that gets the menu. You could provide this as a variable. That's what you would normally do. And then normally when you query, you get 3 states, the loading, the error, and the data. And this is using Apollo. You deal with errors, you deal with the loading state, and then you render the menu. One particular thing that I think is useful here is that GraphQL is strictly typed. And so we share the types from the API to the front end. Which means when I get the menu, I will, for example, if I don't check that the items exist, because they might not exist, TypeScript here will immediately warn me and say, hey, this can not exist, and so you need to properly check if this thing is even there, which is very useful. And also, we use TypeScript, and one of the most annoying things about TypeScript is, of course, you have to define the types. And so since we already have to do them in the API, we just use them directly as the types in the front end. And of course, all of the data is defined by us. So we define, and that's one thing with GraphQL is really have to define. So menu type has a name. I might call it name. Someone else might call it something else. I call it title, for example. And so the module is not opinionated on those names at all. It doesn't provide the schema. You have to create that. I think I'm going to run a bit short on time here, but I wanted to address also authentication a little bit. And this, I think, is one of...
Sorry to interrupt you. You have half an hour, like 20 minutes more at least.
Okay.
So
yeah, I have a lot of topics.
Take time.
So, yes. Okay. So authentication, I think, is one of the pain points when you start decoupling, or at least is one of the first ones you will deal with. It can be a bit time consuming and feeling like you're really reinventing the wheel and really doing all of the things that Drupal does for you, and you immediately jump on this topic. So I will share also a little bit how we do the authentication part. So we use the JWT module, and we have some custom mutations that allow us to log in. So for example, this is the most simple one, mutation JWT login. You provide an email and a password, and it gives you back a JWT. And then with this JWT, you can use it as the authorization header. And then the module just uses that and knows that you're logged in. If you provide this token, it will know that you're authenticated, and it will do the access checking properly and so on. We did have to really do a lot of work here. The JWT module was really helpful, but still we had to write all of this custom code to do several workflows that are, maybe I'll show at least one of them locally here. So I'll do a registration, for example, but when you do a registration, then you have to do the verification link and all of that. So there's a lot of workflows that we have to do, like resetting passwords and things like that. So for example, I'll just show the registration because, so sorry, and I'm running dev mode locally with a lot of things in ddev, so this might be a bit slow, but I will try. So I'm registering an account, and we allow the user to kind of log in, but in a status where it is not verified, so you can't actually do a lot of the things. But in this case, we are doing job boards, and so this would be like an applicant logging in. He can upload his CV, he can start giving information about himself, but he won't be available for, in this case, for companies to look at his resume and say, oh, I want to contact you, and so on. But when you do the registration, then you also have to verify your email. So we have to do all of this wiring, and all of this is really not done. And I think this is not done in the GraphQL and in JSON API. So we have this link. It uses the ID of the user, a date stamp, and a token. And with all of these things, then we have another mutation that gives you a JWT, and then you are logged in. So this is a lot of the things we had to build ourselves. And here you can also see more or less the menus. Let me go. So yeah, you can see here the query that gets some of the menus. And so, for example, this menu here on the side, it has icons, right? And so this is something we had to build kind of custom because we use this module called menu attributes. And then you can provide the class, and based on the class, you can give it an icon and so on. So this is some of the things we are doing in terms of logging in. And then, of course, you need to be able to also reset your password. That's a completely different workflow. But again, it needs security, it needs validation. So it needs to send a token and a timestamp. And really, it does feel a little bit like rebuilding all of these things that Drupal already gives you. So yeah, this is more or less, GraphQL provides some things. So for example, the reset password is something that the GraphQL provides a little helper, but really it kicks off the email, the normal Drupal email, which is obviously pointing to your backend and not to the front end if it's a fully decoupled thing. So you still need to do the work to customize that. So there's really a lot involved in authentication. We had to more or less build it custom using the JWT as kind of the foundation, but really quite a lot of work.
Before you go, Joao, we have actually a question from Klausi, I think.
Yes.
At least he's raised it. Maybe we can just jump to it now quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I just raised my hand earlier to get attention to Joao when he was breaking off. So no question. I lower my hand. Sorry.
Cool. I'm still presenting, right? Yes. So the search is really a crucial part for us. So we build job boards, and one of the obviously main things is that applicants want to find jobs. So I will try. Let me see. I have the queries here. I think this is easier. So we use Search API. We've always used Search API, and it's kind of a foundational part on our system. It's not this one. It's this one. So let me just yeah, because I wanted to show more or less the model. We have.
Can you make
so
it?
when we
sorry to interrupt you. Can you make it a little bit larger? Is that possible? Just
yes,
one or two more up.
To do that, let me try to go with this to the Drupal site, and maybe there.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, maybe not so big. Can just a little bit. Thank you.
Yes. So this is initially when we started, we made a GraphQL Search API module for the 3.x version. And in the 3.x version, GraphQL gives you all of these things. But in 4.x, it works very differently because you have to really define all the schema. And so we had to kind of rebuild. But the idea more or less here with our Search API, at least, is we first define all the schema, all the types, all of these things. So we need conditions to filter. We need facet information. We need to have full text search and geo information and language and so on. But in the end, the idea is more or less these queries you can really you can really see them more or less as a function that runs inside Drupal, so it has access to all of Drupal, and it basically does a search API query programmatically in the back. It takes all of these things as parameters for the query, and then it performs the query. I think we would want to open source this, but currently this really lives inside of our system with some custom code. We would have to do some work to really provide this as a module. And I think that's possible. But again, the GraphQL 4.x modules, they're not something you install and it's working, because you still have to do this part here, which is different. Our case is search API job result, but this would be something else. And we are shipping meta tags, and this would be, for example, one of the custom parts that wouldn't be by default in the search API. But this is our search. I think I killed this, but let me put it back. And here you can really kind of see, if I go over to Apollo here, that the queries are here being run, and then there's the conditions, there's all the facets, which are these things here, which normally you would see them on the side, but here they are like this. And also a lot of meta information. That's something quite critical for us, is that all of this needs to be server rendered, all of this needs to have SEO, meta information, and all of this needs to be controlled inside Drupal. So when we go to configuration and search API, we have some parts here. We really want to control a lot of these things inside of Drupal. So in our job search index, we kind of define here, and the administrator of the job board can control all of this and can change the page title accordingly, and there's tokens and all these things, and all of this is sent to the front end with GraphQL. Yeah, so that's more or less the search. And as we have the job search, we also have the kind of the opposite, which is recruiters going to the job board and looking for candidates, which is it's kind of similar functionality, and it uses the same search API in GraphQL, but with different configurations, more or less. Do I still have a little bit of time?
Yep.
Should we continue?
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think another thing which was for us interesting is there was definitely workflows we wanted to customize, like onboarding and so on, where typically in Drupal it would be very easy and very tempting to just throw the form in there, but we really wanted to have like some special user experience for this onboarding and some of these what would be forms but now are not. But then there are a lot of other forms we don't want to just do all of them from scratch every time. And so one of the things we were thinking about is how can we kind of leverage all of the things we already have in Drupal to try and make some of these forms a little bit easier to make. And one of the things that the GraphQL module has is a query, and this is by default in GraphQL, which is called entity definition. And basically it gives you all of the things about an entity. So if I do this for one of our entities, which is of node, and the bundle is job per template, I get all of the information about all the fields, and you can bypass some of the fields, but yeah, with field types here, which yeah, and then with all of these fields, it gives you the description, the type, if it's a multi-value field, if it's not a multi-value field. We have some custom properties here as well. What are the default values? And with all of this information, we can build a form. And that's more or less what we do. Let me show you it. Let me show this here. So we have a React component that basically is consuming this. So it takes like an entity type and a bundle, and then it generates the form automatically. This also means that when we add a new field in the backend, it will show up. There's just a little configuration to kind of map the API names with the Drupal names, so that then the mutations also work. But it's, I will show the job, for example, which it's a big form. And this is one of the things that is important for us. We have a lot of clients that have different fields. So, for example, the job in Germany might have some fields, some specific fields. It might have or want to have the salary defined in the job. Some other countries don't require the salary to be defined in the job. So there's a lot of custom things, and we want to make adding those fields as easy as possible, and that they already show up in the form without doing a lot of the work. So this is the form. This is like a text field. This is the text area. But then there's taxonomy terms, multi-taxonomy, but sometimes they are single taxonomy. So this is all coming from Drupal. There's not, I mean, the front end kind of reads the field and says, okay, this is a taxonomy field. I know what to do with this. This is this component. This is a text field. I know what to do with this. This is that component. But all of the labels, all of the descriptions, all of the placeholders, that's coming from Drupal. And that's always controlled in Drupal. And then because we have this mapping of kind of the Drupal name and the API name, we can also run the mutations automatically, which is another part. So when I submit, this actually works and does submit it. So that's more or less something we did, which allow us to. So for example, if I look at a completely different entity, not this one, but let me just go here. No. So if I remember the path. Yeah. So for example, this is a module called Search API saved searches. Basically allows a user to save a search and then get emails when there are new results for that search. But then we have like an edit form and a delete and all of these things, and we don't want to reinvent that. And if you put fields, we want those fields to immediately appear. So we have all of these forms and a user form. So if I inspect here, and I will see, yeah, this entity definition, which takes new things, and so it returns different fields, but renders the form the same way. And that's, again, something we did a little bit custom. It does use this query from the GraphQL module, but it's something we had to kind of, it was useful to have this query. At least it provides like the building blocks to allow us to go in this direction. Yeah, I think there's one topic maybe which is also kind of complicated, but I can glance over it at least. Some of these forms have file uploads, and one of the things the GraphQL module does is it has a service that allows you to do file uploads. Let me just try to find. So we have this is I guess this is the important part. So if you have data coming into the mutation with the GraphQL mutation, you can take that and basically hand it over to this file upload service. This is from GraphQL, and then it gives you a file entity, and from there you can save it in your node or whatever you are doing. So this is something. This is more or less how we are doing the file upload. It uses this. Let me just try to show one that has, yeah. So creating a job with logo, exactly. So it uses GraphQL doesn't have maybe Klaus, you know this better than I do, but GraphQL doesn't have like a protocol defined or a spec for file uploads. But the most common one is the one that the Drupal GraphQL uses, and this it kind of works more or less out of the box. But you do need, if you use this service, it's not too hard to make it. So for example, here. I'm passing in a logo which I have uploaded, or I have not, but I will. If I have it here, so screenshot. So data.logo, it will go to here, and this is just this little client for GraphQL. So I upload it, and then what I get back is it's saved here in Drupal. So this is more or less, it works sort of out of the box in GraphQL. It's not documented here yet in the GraphQL docs, but I think this would be useful to do. And just I think the one extra thing is that I think this is a nice functionality of the GraphQL module and this is quite important for us, is it allows you to configure the schema. So the schema is basically where all the types are defined, but it allows you to split them up into several modules. And this works very well for us because we have a certain functionality that is enabled on one client, but then it's not enabled on another client. Most of them are within our installation profile, but some are enabled, some are not. There might be a job board which has resumes. There might be one which doesn't have resumes. And so it's nice that you can split this up over several modules, and then it kind of builds the whole schema with whatever is configured here. And this is our Jobiqo schema, and most of these things come from modules. So yeah, that's more or less how you normally structure your schema with the GraphQL for the DEX module. I think that's more or less it. And if there are questions, I will try to answer them.
Oh, thank you very much. There was a lot of content, and
yeah, sorry.
It was great.
It's too quick in this short time.
No, it was great, and I think we can start with Gabe.
Yep.
So first, great presentation. That was super interesting.
Gabe, we hear you a little bit bad. Can you get closer? Closer to the microphone.
How's this?
Also low, but maybe speak loud.
Okay. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, it's good.
So first, great job. That was super impressive, and I love the way you structured it. I can't believe you got through so much material without seeming to gloss over anything. So what I was wondering the whole time was what Drupal does for you, and at the end I got a sense of it, which was it provides data modeling, but I wonder if there's other things that Drupal is, that you're specifically using Drupal for, and why you didn't go with something else like Symfony or API platform or any one of those other kind of frameworks.
Yeah. Yes, I think, I mean, we did have this kind of like, should we continue with Drupal or not? And that discussion lasted for like 15 seconds because we just have a lot of time and knowledge invested into Drupal, and would be, I think, a waste to throw all of that away. We still get a lot out of Drupal. I do think there can be maybe a setup where we can get more even. But still, like all of the content modeling, so all of the building the content model, that's done in Drupal. But still, so in our job boards, there's what we call a content administrator. So this is someone who goes to Drupal, logs into the backend, and manages all of the jobs. He can create company profiles or add people to profiles. He can assign commerce credits, configure meta information for one job or a job search. There's still a lot that these administrators are doing in Drupal. Taxonomies is a huge topic as well for us. so they're managing taxonomies as well, doing all kinds with taxonomies. There's also a module we use called Taxonomy Manager, which allows you to merge taxonomies and have clones and things, all kinds of things. So I do think we still get a lot out of Drupal, but there are some corners of the app. So there are like fundamental pieces that we wanted to improve, like the resume search, the job search, the resume editing experience. But then there are little corners which now we have to build them. If we could just use Drupal, it would be better. But it's kind of difficult to coincide more or less the fully decoupled with some pages which would be in Drupal. So we do lose some things, but I think we still get a lot out of Drupal. And of course, all of the knowledge that the developers have of Drupal, that still stays.
So I'll try. It's a familiar platform. You get content modeling and kind of like the roles and permissions control.
Yes, you get access control, you get configuration management. That are the most important things for us. So we have different configuration per client, and in Drupal we just have a configuration management system, so we can deploy different configuration per client. In Symfony, we would have to reinvent all of that, right? There is no configuration management system there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and some of the modules like the Search API saved searches, we still get a lot out of those little modules, even if we don't get all of it. But still, all of the, like you save a search and then cron sends emails, all of those things are still done by the module. So
cool. And Alexander, you have a question?
Yeah, so great presentation, thanks. Like one of the things I really like about GraphQL as well is this composable schema. But what I'm wondering is, how do you deal with the differences in schemas that this causes across installations? So how does your client handle the fact that the schema will be different for different installs?
Maybe I can answer.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm totally hijacking you, Joao, here.
Please do, yes.
So the front end needs to be aware of it, is basically that. So configuration management does not only have to happen on the back end with us, because the API schema can be a little bit different per client. The front end needs to be aware of it. So in our case, we fully control the front end because we also develop that for our customers. So it's not a problem for us. But of course, you're raising a good point, right? If you want to have a universal API that many customers share from you, then you have a bit of a problem because the schema is different. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you built this in a build step, or is this something you can do at runtime? Because I'm trying to figure this out for OpenSocial as well. So that's why I'm
so the types we generate it's a bit weird right now. It's in a transition phase, I would say. But the types, like I've said, they come from the schema. So there are kind of internal types. These are always there. These are the ones we know will always be there. And then there are types which are client types, more or less. So they kind of override. So for example, a job might have custom fields for a client. So that's not one of the core that are always the same. But then there are ones which they will be. And if something gets, like, if we really on a client completely customize the menu and the menu is just completely different, we have an internal kind of overriding component system. So we swap the component out, and then that new component, which is completely custom, knows about the new structure of the menu, for example.
Interesting. Okay.
So there's still coupling, of course.
Yeah.
It
So
needs to know.
another question that I had was related to the menu system. So your menu API returns links, but one of the things I'm struggling with is that those links make sense for Drupal. But how do you make sure they also make sense for your front end? So basically that your routing model stays in sync. And also, if you're starting to think about different consumers than a website, like maybe a mobile app, how would a mobile app figure out what to show for a specific link based on the menu that it's got?
So the first one, I think, yes, it makes sense to Drupal. So there are places where we make sort of the compromise of, like, we know this is the same, more or less. So there is that compromise, the agreement between the backend and the front end. That is, for example, the login is /user/login, for example. There are places where it's not. And then regarding mobile apps, that's still something I think we will still kind of decide. There is the option to create a different server, a different GraphQL server for the mobile app. So that's something I find could be interesting, but I don't know how complex that would be. So that only parts of the schema make sense for the mobile app. All of the SEO things, all of the landing page things, for example, paragraphs, that doesn't really make much sense for the mobile app. So maybe we make a server which just has parts of the schema, and it's a little bit a smaller schema. We still don't know. We have the project now to do the mobile app, so we will find out. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, one of the ideas I'm playing with is this is a problem we'll have to tackle eventually as well, is that instead of returning the URL, you would return the resource that you want to display on that page. And I guess for some special pages like login, logout, you could maybe even use the route name itself. And for other things, you could, for example, do the universal identifier of whatever content it is. One of the things, especially in GraphQL, that's like a standard, is that you have a root field called node, not to be confused with a Drupal node, but you can just give it this universal identifier and get back any type of content. So that would work really well with that, to figure out what kind of content did I receive and what should that then be in my client side or app routing system.
Yeah. And we also have, so we have also landing pages. That's something I didn't show, and it uses paragraphs. And so there's also one part of the system where it's like you give Drupal a route. So you give it the URL, and Drupal will give it whatever it is. So if it's a job, it will give you the job. If it's a landing page, it will give you the landing page. The front end doesn't really know. Once it receives, it does like a switch statement. Okay, it's a landing page. I go to this component. It's a job. I go to that component.
Right. Yeah.
Because so the URL is completely configured from the backend.
So it's basically using the URL then as this universal identifier.
Yes.
Cool.
And Drupal takes the URL and gives back whatever it is. Yeah. Using unions, using GraphQL unions, you can say like this type can be this or that or that. And that's more or less what we do right now.
Cool.
So I wanna this be, you know, just for everyone that like have a hard cut now, or maybe have to go to other meetings. I think this conversation is great, and I think we should like continue exactly this. So therefore, you know, if it is okay, maybe to stay for a couple of more minutes. If there are more questions, is that okay to you, Joao?
Sure, for me it's fine. Yes.
Then it's going to be recorded anyways, so we can take a couple of more if there's more questions.
I mean, I can talk about this for hours. I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to ask a question. But...
No, where I am curious, Alexander, where I'm actually curious, you know, we have a slot next week open. You said that you're from Open Social, right?
Yes.
And Taco has already tweeted me and said like that he wants to have a recording of this talk. So maybe, you know, not putting you on the spot, but you know, maybe somebody in your team or you would be willing to show us something that you are working on next week.
I don't know if I can get this done next week.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have some deadlines for myself that I would like to make next week, and I don't have anyone else to outsource this to at the moment, unfortunately.
Anyhow, if there is anyone
in a future
yes.
meeting, yeah, sure, definitely. So I guess,
yeah,
sorry, yeah,
please.
go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh yes, I was going to move on to another question that I had.
Go for it.
Which was, you said that you had to rebuild the authentication flow in GraphQL, but I wasn't really sure why you did that. Why not keep the authentication itself out of band, so basically out of the GraphQL protocol? Is that because the API is always on a different URL than your front end, or?
No, it's not. We didn't particularly want to have this in GraphQL. I don't think so. That's one of the things I think, like if Drupal would give us this, we would take it immediately. If it is JSON API or whatever, we don't, yeah. It's the authentication flow. It could be something else. This is definitely something that requires a lot of wiring. It's a different URL. The mail goes through the Drupal, but then the activation link or the verification link, you need to override it and change in this email that goes out. So there's a lot of there that we needed to do. We use GraphQL because the JWT doesn't really, or the JWT module doesn't assume that you're using JSON API or GraphQL. So that was just what we were already using, and so that's what we used. But it wasn't because we wanted specifically to have this in GraphQL. We could have done this in a different system even. It just felt like the most simple one, but then it got more complicated.
I see that Gabe has actually taken off his. Maybe did you want to add something to this, Gabe, or?
Yeah. Drupal core does provide endpoints to authenticate and get a cookie, but I know that people have said that like the password reset stuff and registration maybe aren't all there. If those features were there, would you consider using Drupal core's authentication if you were building this again? Yes?
I would consider it even still right now, to be honest. Just not having that code done by us would be great.
But I think Drupal core gives you cookies, right? So cookies might be a problem for us.
Yeah.
Frontend and backend live at different URLs, and people nowadays block third-party cookies. So your API request will not send, your browser will not send any cookies along to the backend. So that's where the cookie authentication has a little bit of problems. Maybe we could figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a point that all of the different technologies in API first kind of, they could all use the same, I think. It's not, I mean, unless some people might say, no, I want everything in GraphQL and I don't want to use anything else. I don't think that's really the case for us. If this was provided by Drupal core, we would use it, I think. We would certainly consider it at least.
So especially when you're when you're front end and back end.
Sorry, maybe Gabe first. Sorry.
Will you look at what Drupal core provides, and I'll send you a link, and then tell me, and maybe you can say what it's missing, and then that would give us some concrete stuff to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Maybe the Drupal core stuff could provide some hook that the JWT module could hook into. So Drupal core does this authentication routes on the assumption of cookies. But if you could kind of swap that, instead of cookies, send back a JWT, then this might be helpful.
So so at Open Social, what I'm currently working on is a chat feature, which is actually really simple because it's with it, like we just embed it within the Drupal website. So I can just hijack the session cookie, and Drupal takes care of the session for me most of the time. Where we have struggled is that we didn't have the GraphQL API yet, but we wanted to in the native app that we're developing, we wanted to fetch some data from the app side, but render other things in a web view. But this is also where you see a limitation of cookies, because users would log in the web view, but the cookie is sandboxed within the web view. So we didn't actually have a session to make any requests for anything that we could do natively in the app. So we actually used the OAuth 2 server module for this. That's there to implement OAuth authentication. And then we kind of sneakily did something where you can use the OAuth session to create a Drupal cookie. So you can do the login out of the sandbox and then just inject your session into the web view. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is how to handle OAuth scopes with Drupal's authorization model. One of the things I see is that Drupal very much relies on the current user and either being authenticated or anonymous, and also all the permissions that a user has. One of the things that I think will be a challenge with Drupal is looking at how does this look for third-party systems that want to fetch data for Drupal, and how do you do the access then? Because you'll either like you'll have the scenario where it's a system requesting data, basically anonymous, but they may have very broad access. You'll have the scenario where the system is doing something on behalf of the user, which means that you're bound by the permissions that the user has, but also then by the permission that the application has for the user. So that's going to be like scoped. And then I guess finally you have maybe just the regular user for your first party applications. That's,
Yeah.
I don't have an answer there yet, but that's something we're going to be looking at, I think, at the end of February. So tips are welcome.
It sounds like once decoupled menus initiative is over, we need a decoupled authentication initiative.
Oh, please.
Correct.
It's okay. I mean, that was right. Jesus' idea
Yeah.
was that we would push a snowball off the mountain, and that DMI would be number one, and then we would tackle the next most difficult thing. So that's okay. I thought it might be like views and collections, but maybe authentication is more important.
Yeah, I think for me personally, authentication was definitely the point where like this is hard. It's just, in a lot of the CMSs or headless CMSs, they will give you like the authentication. Here's the package or whatever, and you get social authentication and everything. We didn't even go there, but there's, of course, we will have to implement this. How do you log in with Facebook, log in with this and that, and using the hybrid auth or whatever else there is, the social module. I imagine we will have to also kind of handwire all of that, but it would be great if there is a story for that out of the box with Drupal.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting to hear because, of course, both of you are, I'm talking about Alexander and from Jobiqo, both of you are, of course, creating an application that requires a login and a lot of things that is happening within the application. So for us in the menu initiative, of course, like to start with, the simplest part is, of course, just to do the menu for a non-authenticated user. And then you need to figure out all the stuff about making the menu for authenticated users and the permissions and that. So therefore, like, I think it is a valid point for the authentication. The question is, like, it would be really nice to hear, like, how many are creating decoupled applications in our ecosystem that are actually doing it for like these type of applications that you're building, so that would be an interesting, because we hear that too. We hear a lot of those examples, and yeah, very, very good insights here. I'm a bit just thoughtful of time. I think like we can still continue here, but I think that it would be wise just to stop the recording so we can get this online. I know that many people are waiting for this talk here.